Go anywhere in the Siege Players YouTube comment section, and this is a point that will get brought up. It's along the lines of the "they ruined Battlefield" guy from Battlefield Friends. I can't believe Ubisoft's ruining the game again. For simple folks like us, love me wife, hate Ubisoft, simple as. Come on, England! And then there's probably going to be somebody else in the comment section going, I can't believe Ubisoft has made another change for the casual community. This is... it's reprehensible. Just hideous. I'm here to lose several subscribers. Today, we're going to bust one of the biggest myths that the Siege community has ever been told. The myth that Ubisoft caters exclusively to Pro League. I can point to 3 key balancing topics. Buck losing his frag grenades some time ago, which irritated pros and casuals. Goyo getting nerfed, which irritated casuals. And the ongoing whac-a-mole game being played with frag grenades and scopes on attack, which irritates some pros, sometimes, and mostly casuals. Buck losing his frag grenades is a universally disliked decision that people still talk about to this day. The issue is that I think a lot of people who have a lot of hours in Siege, generally speaking, seem to think that this was a decision made for casuals, and casuals seem to think this decision was made for competitive players. When Buck lost his frag grenades, Ubisoft's cited reason for this change was Buck brings an exclusive soft breaching capability to his team that makes him the best at what he does, and we feel having frag grenades on top of that is a bit too much. The Claymore should reduce the punch in his kit from the frags, but do more to provide cover while he is soft breaching. A seemingly simple rationale for the change, but it ignored how Buck fit in the game, because Buck wasn't more powerful than Sledge, solely based off of his frag grenades alone. Buck was more powerful than Sledge because he could do vertical play from floors below, creating vertical pressure upwards, and not to mention Buck could create more vertical holes in a shorter amount of time. In English, he could make holes faster than Sledge. So his skeleton key was simply more useful. It was more versatile than Sledge's hammer. Now the logical thing to do here would have been to nerf Buck's gadget, because that was the key difference. Make Sledge the slower variant of a vertically inclined operator that could make more holes in the long run, whereas Buck could make less holes, but faster. What happened instead was Buck ended up losing a very powerful aspect of his kit that gave him a great degree of functionality in a utility clearing meta for attackers, which ended up tanking his pick rate in the long run. Something that hasn't been addressed with Sledge for years until he lost his SMG-11. The last sentence in the explanation, implying the Claymore should provide more cover while he is soft breaching, ignored the fact that usually a Sledge or a Buck on a smart team does not work by themselves unless they have to. Usually, a Buck or a Sledge does their thing with the buddy watching their flank. And the most pressing matter that a vertical player has to watch out for isn't a flanker, it's somebody below with a C4. Competitive players sink more time into the game, so trends and patterns get observed more. C4 being the usual counter to an operator like a Buck or a Sledge is just one of those. Understandably, a casual player who doesn't see these patterns might think that Pro League players were running rampant throughout the scene with Buck's frag grenades, destroying all that was held near and dear to the defenders' hearts, which would make sense if these same pro players didn't have to play on defense too. Changes that are quote unquote done for Pro League are often maligned as reactionary decisions made to a Pro League player mauling about something that's overpowered. The reality was that there was hardly a person in the competitive scene complaining about Buck's frag grenades. Here's what Pengu had to say about the topic. If you don't know who he is, look him up.
Buck was viewed by many as a very balanced operator.
Bruh.
Because he is. Sledge, who can be used in similar situations, wrong, he can't.
It's pretty hard to make the case that the game is biased towards Pro League when one of your best Pro League players, arguably the best in the world, is actively disagreeing with the rationale behind your decision-making process. But the shotgun wasn't nerfed. In fact, the nade was taken away, and the shotgun was given more ammo, which ultimately did nothing to counteract the blow that was given to Buck by having his nades taken away in the first place. It was like breaking his leg and giving him an ice cream cone. This change was complained about by pros, casters, many influential people in the competitive Siege scene. Buck's frag grenades remained gone forever, never to be seen again. It ignored that competitive players don't insist on playing overpowered characters as much as they actively refrain from playing suboptimal characters, because there is no inherent advantage in doing something suboptimal in a competitive environment. Ubisoft's goal of reducing Buck's pick rate was accomplished at the cost of making an operator less fun to play, and a refrain from addressing the reason Buck was picked more in the first place. making Sledge take over a lot of Buck's jobs, whereas the more nuanced decision of tweaking the gadget could have let them exist side by side. The change didn't just hurt casual fans of Buck who enjoyed playing with his versatile kit, it ended up reducing his presence in competitive games with prize money on the line, which from a marketing decision didn't make a ton of sense. Buck losing his frag grenades, not biased towards Pro League. Goyo remains to this day one of the most controversial changes to the game, simply based on its constant citing as an example of a change that was done to cater to Pro League. The Goyo change, to me, is a bit more black and white. Goyo was busted and he needed a nerf. If you think that 3 bulletproof shields that provided a ton of area denial for 10 seconds apiece wasn't a problem, I don't know what to tell you. Pro League games were turned into utility simulator. Some of the most boring and uninteresting rounds to ever play out. Did the pros have a choice in playing this busted team comp? No, because there was money on the line. And you would have done the same thing in their position. Despite constant begging on hands and bloody knees from competitive players all the way to the mountaintop, Goyo did not get a shield taken away from him until 6 months after his release, which maybe Ubisoft was onto something. Maybe they were just hoping the problem would go away. And I can't blame them, because the reaction when it finally happened resembled something like a whaling boat pulling up to a Save the Whales convention. I don't appreciate that false equivalence, Greg. Only competitive players thought he was OP. Love me wife. Hate Ubisoft. Simple as. As if only competitive players thinking something was OP made it not OP at a casual level of play. Sorry guys, unlike trickle-down economics, trickle-down balance is real. Also, the argument assumes that a degree in quantum mechanics is required to press put gadget here 3 times on a big choke point and then shoot the giant red box on the back. Just because a group of people is unaware of the potential impact something can provide does not mean that it can't have impact. Also, metas change. There was nothing to indicate that the utility simulator meta wouldn't even reach the lowest of ranks at some point. Also, I'm inclined to believe that the idea that it wasn't impacting lower ranks is a baseless claim. Who cares about the win-loss chart? This is the same argument that comes up in League of Legends whenever a busted character gets added and their win-loss is low because a bunch of noobs saved up money for the new champion and don't know how to play them when it comes out. Then the champion gets a buff because the win-loss is too low, and then they end up being more powerful than anybody can reasonably deal with in the right hands. Your Honor, League of Legends, death. Goyo's relatively low win rate compared to his peers was an average. It didn't imply that there were no examples of players aware of his strengths at all. Post-nerf Goyo, by the logic of using his win-loss on the chart as an argument, is in company with Maestro, Wamai, Vigil. Are these operators bad? No. Of course they're not. How many Goyo, Capcan, Leisha, Ella, Frost combos did people see in ranked or in quick match? Hell, how many do you still see? It's such a frustratingly simple argument to break down, it almost feels like a waste of time. In fact, if we look at the highest win-loss rates of operators in both of these charts, we see a trend. Operators that favor aggressive, gunplay-focused styles of play tend to have higher win-loss charts, probably because the chart is ranked data, which is basically the Call of Duty version of Siege compared to the comparably more methodical nature of competitive Siege. In fact, pick rates for professional competitions of Siege and these ranked charts are different things too, with a lot of operators having low pick rates in these ranked charts, having much higher pick rates in tournaments like Hibana. Valkyrie gets banned about half the time in ranked, but has an 80% ban rate as of the current NAL Stage 3 games, reducing her pick rate to around 5%. Using ranked stats as an argument to discuss balancing is fine. What's not fine is using them exclusively without looking at the bigger picture, and demanding that objectively broken characters like pre-nerf Goyo stay in the game because other people can't figure out what makes them good. That's ridiculous. It also implies that your player base is too stupid to figure out what makes a character good, and if they were too stupid, it would still not be a good enough reason to let the character just be OP. And speaking of these high win rates among gunner ops, we should talk about guns and scopes. But Goyo losing a shield? Not a biased decision. It was a necessary one. Balancing for guns and scopes is another controversial point that I think serves as a lack of bias towards Pro League because it doesn't really impact Pro League. The only thing it really impacts is pick rate and comfortability, which if you want to make the case that just changing the pick rates of operators is good enough, that's one thing. I'd argue that balancing for pick rate for the purpose of balancing a game is counterintuitive, but if you want to come at it from a marketing angle, let's say we want as much diversity in the operator pool to show off our cast of characters at the highest level of play. Sure, it's a goal I would say is still a bad idea, but at least you're coming up with a plan and executing on it in a way that makes sense. Kind of. I would get it if scopes seem to make a really big difference in competitive Siege, and they don't. Plenty of people use guns with low zoom scopes to give themselves an easier time fighting in close quarters and to keep their peripheral vision from being compromised. If you want an example of how a big zoom scope doesn't really make an operator good automatically, look at Callie. Now, I know her sniper rifle is not representative of other characters. If she had that scope on Thatcher's AR-33, it would be a different story, but Callie is an example of a character that would probably be really good in an arena siege game mode like Sugar Fright, whereas she struggles to work in 5v5 bomb, unless certain conditions are met. Scopes are an effective way of reducing pick rate, but generate animosity among the player base because they make players feel like they're getting punished for having too much fun or for using what seems like the easiest fragging tools available to them. Like it or not, Siege is still an FPS game. And especially in a game with one-shot headshots, people will obviously gravitate towards weapons that are gonna make it easier for them to get headshots, which tend to be high rate of fire, low recoil guns, even if their body shot damage leaves something to be desired. Remember people freaking out that Aruni had a DMR on defense, like she was gonna be some kind of spawn-peeking window terminator? That didn't happen. Even though her DMR has a better scope than her often hollow-sighted Roni. At no point will you hear pro players actively complain at length about a scope change. They might go on Twitter and say, oh, this recoil sucks. Or they'll go, no more 1.5, frowny face. And then that's it, they move on. They'll switch operators that can fill a similar role, or guns on the operator that got nerfed. The Mexico Major was a great example of this. Yeah, Zoph's pick rate went down a little bit, but the teams that relied on Zoph in their team plans just had their players switch to the LMG, and Sledge's pick rate went up even higher. Sledge's high pick rate meant that his nerf was inevitable given Ubisoft's track record, despite Sledge basically being a pinnacle of Siege's balancing, receiving no particularly significant changes since the game's release over 6 years ago. The game of musical scopes and grenades with attackers eventually caught up to the guy, as people eventually gravitated towards 2 fully automatic weapons and frag grenades. Now, people are complaining about the Roni, because people have finally figured out that Aruni is actually a pretty good operator. This gun is too good. This gun is just too damn good. Whoa there, bud. Put the good gun down. This approach ignores that it doesn't take a lot for a gun to be, quote, good in Rainbow Six Siege. There are a lot of guns that are good in Rainbow Six Siege that would be ass in a game like Call of Duty. As long as it has low recoil and a high rate of fire, you're pretty much set, and that's basically half of the arsenal of Siege operators, especially defenders. Because the whole point was that attackers had assault rifles, they had better primary weapons, because attacking is harder than defending. So a lot of the defenders had weaker guns, but there was a catch. A lot of them have a high rate of fire. So if you hit the head, you can still win your gunfights. It's a caveat, but it's a skill-based caveat. Even guns with lower rate of fires are serviceable with mechanically skilled players as long as they're laser beams because, again, one-shot headshot. Mitigating circumstances about a gun often end up getting ignored when these changes happen. Can you put an angled grip on it? How fast does it go through its magazine? Can you take gunfights with multiple people in quick succession? How fast is its T-decay with body shots compared to other guns? Can you get away with body shotting reliably? Guns are the aspects of competitive play that Siege players discuss the least. You quickly figure out the most optimal configuration of gun and attachments for you, and then you move on. It's kind of like strength training in the NFL. There are many types of players in the NFL with different body types, and that has an impact on things like their speed and strength relative to each other. You've got big, strong guys that aren't as fast. You've got fast, strong guys that aren't as big. And then every once in a while, you get a guy grown in a lab, like DK Metcalf, who was strong, big, and fast. But this is usually the exception. You've got some exceptional Siege players because their decision-making skills and experience trump their peers. But there isn't a single competitive Siege player with bad mechanical aim compared to the average population. Just like there isn't a single player in the NFL that isn't strong compared to the average population. Aim is a given. Scopes are the least of a competitive player's concerns. Not a bias towards Pro League. There are perhaps more examples that we can find, but I feel that the overwhelming majority of them point to one thing that Ubisoft cares more about than anything: pick rate. They want the game to have a diverse pick rate so that the game is more easily marketable and there's justification for their operator designs. At least, that's the only thing that comes to my mind. I don't really know if this is possible to do. I think we have to accept that some operators just aren't going to be used as much as other ones, and it's okay to have some novelties mixed in with the staples. We have lots of material out there to learn from as well. Content creators worry about Rainbow Six Siege's numbers constantly. If it weren't for Pro League, they'd be worse.